Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage, where Michael K. Vaughan and I come together every week to talk about the comic books on which we have wasted our youths. And we come from somewhat similar backgrounds, but different enough to be interesting. And this originated as an event on Michael's channel. He was innocently doing a run-through of his Marvel comic Epic collections. Paperback full-color epic reprint line that is really good. It's really interesting. It has a lot of variety, but we quickly decided that we wanted to stray further afield than just Marvel reprints. And since I horned my way in on his event, he gets to pick what we talk about every week. And it was his pick this week. This week we are talking about a square-bound graphic novel comic book from the late 1980s. The Killing Joke. By Brian Boland, Alan Moore, with coloring by John Higgins. There is the signature Brian Boland cover. And there is the back showing a Joker card with Batman and the Joker as two halves of the same card. And this is let's go through the story, maybe for those of you who haven't read this. This is story of Batman's arch nemesis, the Joker, the Crown Prince of Crime, who goes to the house of Police Commissioner Gordon in Gotham City. And the door is answered, he rings the bell, and the door is answered by Barbara Gordon, who, unbeknownst to Commissioner Gordon, is Batgirl. She has been the superhero comic book character Batgirl for 30, 40 years of continuity when this book came out. Beloved comic book character, a crime solver who had been on the Batman TV show, had comics of her own. She hears the doorbell at Commissioner Gordon's house, and she goes to answer the door. At the door is the Joker with a gun leveled at her. He shoots her at point-blank range in the navel. She falls to the ground. She is paralyzed. She is bleeding. Commissioner Gordon is upset. The Joker's thugs subdue him. They beat him unconscious and drag him away. Once they're out of the way, the Joker strips Barbara Gordon, rapes her, photographs her naked, and then leaves the crime scene. She's found later by somebody who came by the house for yoga or something like that. The Joker doesn't kill her. He leaves her. She is paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of her life. When we next see her, she's in a hospital bed telling this to Batman, who has to figure out where the Joker is, what he's doing with Commissioner Gordon. He conducts a manhunt of Gotham City that we see in multi-panel pages, very reminiscent of 9-panel pages, very reminiscent of The Watchmen, which we've seen already on Epic Comic Book Wednesday and also on my own channel. 9 panels showing the action like that. While we're watching Batman searching for the Joker, we see what's going on. The Joker has taken Commissioner Gordon to his secret hideout, which is, and here I want you to guess, and you get just one guess. What are the chances that your one guess where the Joker's hideout is will be correct? I'd say they're probably around 85% correct. I'm betting that you will guess that the Joker's hideout is an abandoned amusement park in Gotham City. Because that's where the Joker's hideout always is. There must be 100 abandoned amusement parks in Gotham City, and for some reason, Batman doesn't have them all staked out, doesn't have surveillance cameras on all of them. Instead, he doesn't even think about it. You saw on that page, he's rousting the Penguin in jail. He's rousting criminals in Gotham. He doesn't figure out that the Joker might take a hostage to an abandoned amusement park, which is something the Joker has done 1,000 times in Batman comics. He doesn't figure that out at all, the world's greatest detective. Instead, he gets an invitation in the mail from the Joker telling him, here's where I am. At that amusement park, the Joker has stripped Commissioner Gordon naked, chained him in a cage, and bombarded him with enlarged photographs of the naked, raped, and bleeding Barbara Gordon, his daughter, in an attempt to drive Gordon insane. Because the subtext here, as we see in flashbacks all throughout the comic book, is the Joker's origin story. And it turns out that he was a chinless, weak-willed, ordinary guy, an ordinary family man and whatnot, who drifts aimlessly into petty crime, and only becomes the Joker that we recognize in a famous sequence, probably the most famous visual sequence in this whole graphic novel. He only becomes the Joker that we know when, being pursued by Batman, he jumps into a lake of toxic chemicals that bleach his skin, turn his hair green, and permanently lipstick his lips and presumably drive him over the edge into complete insanity. His one bad day is what's referred to in this graphic novel. The Joker says that one bad day can make the difference between a normal, upstanding citizen and whatever the Joker is. And what he wants to do, his crime here in this graphic novel, is to inflict that one bad day on Commissioner Gordon and break him. Batman gets his engraved invitations to the abandoned amusement park. He goes there in the Batmobile and confronts the Joker directly. Doesn't do any reconnaissance. It doesn't surprise the Joker in any way. He drives up to the front door, which is an approach that is guaranteed to get a hostage killed, but he does it anyway, and he confronts the Joker, and they have a brief skirmish, and then the Joker flees, and Batman frees Commissioner Gordon from his cage. And the police are coming, and Gordon knows this, and Gordon strictly tells Batman, I want you to go after the Joker, but I want you to apprehend him by the book. I want you to prove to him that our way of doing things, the right way, the righteous way, is correct, that it does work. Now, I'll leave you to decide on your own whether there is any morality conceivable in the world where the right response of a father who has watched his daughter get shot in the stomach, casually, by a maniac who cannot be redeemed, is not to kill that maniac. I'll leave you to decide whether or not there's any morality at all in let's arrest him and put him in prison to have 3 meals a day. One way or another, whether you think that or not is moral, the Batman goes after the Joker, and they have a confrontation that has some noticeable characteristics to it. The Joker pulls Batman's cowl down over his eyes. Instead of gouging his eyes, he pulls the cowl down over his eyes and then strikes him with a 2x4 over the head. Keep in mind, this is the pre-movie Batman. That costume is not armored. That blow would be fatal. But it isn't fatal. Instead, it just bemuses the Batman. It stuns him for a minute. Batman knocks the Joker away, flat on the ground. Walks up to him and, without any caution, without any reconnaissance, without any speed, just walks up to the prone Joker, who turns around with a gun. And it just happens to be blank. In that moment, Batman is not shot 10 times through the face and dies in an abandoned amusement park. Instead, the gun happens to be blank. So the Joker says, well, damn it, I thought it had bullets in it, but I guess it didn't. So now you're going to beat the crap out of me, and then I'll go to prison. And there's a scene where Batman says, well, I don't want to do any of that. I don't want to do any of that. I want to help you. I want to rehabilitate you. Keep in mind, Batman has come here straight from the hospital bed of a Barbara Gordon who will never walk again. He says to the Joker, I don't want to beat the pulp out of you. I want to rehabilitate you. There's no reason why you have to live out on the edge like this. I can help you. The heavy implication all throughout the graphic novel being that Batman himself is the product of someone who had one bad day and approached it slightly differently than the Joker. Emphasis on slightly when it comes to this graphic novel. We are very much supposed to assume that the Joker and Batman are both insane. But that one, I guess, works with Commissioner Gordon and one doesn't. Whatever the degree of that difference is, the Joker says to Batman, well, no, I think the time has passed for that. I really think I'm beyond hope. Which no one would ever say. No insane person would ever say that. And then the Joker proceeds to tell a joke. He tells a stand-up comedian joke about 2 crazy guys. He gets to the punchline, doesn't tell it particularly well, and he starts laughing. And then Batman starts laughing. In the famous final page, Batman starts laughing. And then the 2 of them are laughing together as the police are showing up at the abandoned amusement park. The 2 of them are laughing together, and that's how the graphic novel ends. It ends with Batman and the Joker sharing a good, hearty laugh. 10 feet away is a naked and traumatized Commissioner Gordon, and back in Gotham is a Batgirl who is paralyzed for life. And that is the story here. That is the writing, the signature of the writing here, the brainchild of Brian Boland, is that this gives us an origin story for the Joker. It elaborates on the origin story of the Joker, in which the Joker is essentially Batman's fault. The character in the red hood that was running from Batman and decided to risk it all by jumping into toxic sewage was running from Batman. If he hadn't been, he wouldn't have done that, and he wouldn't become the Joker. That's the signature effect of the writing. And then there's the artwork. Brian Boland is a fantastic cover artist. As you can see, that is an absolutely iconic illustration. And it's not the only one. Brian Boland, someday there will be a big fat coffee table hardcover, if there isn't already, of the collected cover artwork of Brian Boland. It's absolutely amazing. He's not as good as an internal artist. He's a fairly static artist. He tends to heavily favor, as you can see here, I just opened this at random, he tends to heavily favor the exact same camera angles straight ahead at the action. And his work tends to be, it's highly detailed, but it's extremely static. It's not exciting panel by panel artwork at all. A lot of his contemporaries could have done a lot better. For instance, one artist that you would initially be tempted to think is static is Alan Moore's own previous collaborator, Dave Gibbons, who's not at all. He looks static on the surface, but his panel arrangements are not boring. Brian Boland is a far more successful cover artist, poster artist, than he is an internal artist. And since he was a fan favorite, no one ever told him that. So although this graphic novel is revered in comic book circles, especially Batman circles, and although it's hugely influential, just the plot that I've described, well, even if you've never read this before, it'll immediately have you thinking of Batman movies that you've seen. It's hugely influential, but the artwork, I think, is a little bit on the boring side. It's heavily detailed and therefore beautiful, but it's a little on the boring side in terms of comic book artwork. And the writing, well, there's a reason I'm not showing you the graphic panels, the most graphic panels. None of the things that I've described in the plot of this book are left to your imagination. They are all shown to you in this graphic novel. And the reason I'm not showing you those things is connected with the writing. And it boils down to a very simple observation. This comic book is an abomination. It should not have existed. It should not have been made. Brian Boland should have been ashamed of himself for thinking this stuff up and should have been prevented by common decency from even mentioning it to other adults, especially other adult men. Alan Moore, once he got the breakdowns and the plot, should have refused to do the work. High profile and no high profile, check or no check. And the two very seasoned editors, the one who signed off on this and the one who signed off on it beginning and the one who signed off on it ending, the two very seasoned, talented writers and editors should be ashamed of themselves and should have said no. The DC Comics powers that be, who saw the finished product, should have said, I'm sorry you wasted all this time. I wish you'd consulted with us ahead of time. We're of course not putting the DC logo on this. All of that should have happened. This is an abomination. It should not exist. It is not in any way a masterpiece. Instead, what it is, you're going to see this coming if you watch Epic Comic Book Wednesday, this is pretty much the apotheosis of the Stan Lee virus in Marvel, in superhero comic books. This is the rampant violence, sadomasochism, needless to say, misogyny, the shooting, raping, and crippling of a standard-bearing DC character is a plot device only in here, a plot contrivance. The main thing that you, the male reader of this comic, are supposed to pay attention to is whether or not the man, James Gordon, breaks under pressure. That's what you're supposed to pay attention to. Is he still a stand-up guy at the end of the comic? You're not even supposed to think about the fact that the rampant misogyny and nihilism and violence and sadomasochism that Alan Moore wrought to perfection in The Watchmen was fine enough in The Watchmen because The Watchmen was made-up characters. They were homages to established superhero characters, but they weren't those superhero characters, and they certainly weren't mainstream Marvel or DC characters. You don't get any more mainstream than Batman versus the Joker. They certainly weren't that. And I would argue that kind of attitude, what would happen if these things really happened in the real world, owes its ultimate etiology to Stan Lee, who started that, who broke from classic DC Comics by saying, what if these things happened in the world outside your window? What if these things really were real? Well, if they really were real, then if you have a psychotic criminal like the Joker, well, then maybe he would actually start to kill people instead of just, poisoning the Gotham water supply or training all the pigeons of Gotham City to wear Joker smiles or whatever, as he did in hundreds of Batman and Detective Comics stories for 50 years, to the delight of fans. And it was always the same. There was a fiendish plan. It was complicated. Batman and Robin were stymied by it at first, captured by the Joker at first, escape, figure out the plot, defeat the Joker. He goes to jail, and the final panel is him in jail. And the writers just knew that let's wait a week or a month or 2 months to have the Joker come back. We've got a broad range of supervillains. We don't need to do him over and over again. And that was that. And as a fan, you enjoyed that. And it was a lot of fun. If you introduce the Stan Lee virus into comic books, verisimilitude, into superhero comic books where there are no superheroes, there are no superheroes. If you introduce that into the world of superheroes, sooner or later it's going to infest the mainstream. It's going to get to Marvel and DC. And when it does, one of the ultimate expressions of that is this book. And it's revolting in a lot of different ways. On the basic ground level, of that the plot I've described would never happen in the way that it happens. It's disrespectful and ignorant of the character of Batman. He is basically a bystander in this story. It's not just ignorant, but downright violently misogynistic towards the character of Barbara Gordon, who is viewed as plot-enhancing collateral damage in a way that would never happen to a male character. It simply wouldn't happen to a male character. Same thing with the death of Supergirl, who is beaten to death by a random villain in order to advance the plot. It shows a callous disregard on the part of editorial management. If you are an editor and you grew up reading Batman comics, Detective Comics, World's Finest Comics, you're a caretaker of this character. I don't care how long it took you to work your way up from the copy room of DC Comics. You're a caretaker of this character. You don't get to do fundamental differences. Now, powers that be at DC Comics would have said this is an Elseworld story. I don't think they build it that way. This is the original hardcover. I don't think that this says Elseworlds anywhere on it. I've never really been clear on that, but I'm pretty sure that that the powers that be at DC Comics would say this is an Elseworld story, which is DC terminology for what-if story, a story that didn't really happen in continuity. I don't see how you could say that. Continuity immediately started imitating this book. Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, was a cripple. She became a cripple in a wheelchair. She became a character, a crime fighter, in a wheelchair. And forever afterwards, from this point on, the Joker is this kind of, I'm going to cut off the skin of my own face, and then I'm going to wait a while until it's rotting and curling and brown, and then I'm going to staple it to my face. I'm going to think up one over-the-top, psychotically sadistic storyline after another. No longer, gone are the days when Joker was just a really interesting, really good Batman villain. Back in those days, in the 1950s and the early 1960s, a Batman fan would see that the Joker was the villain in an issue and say, oh, good. Oh, this will be really good. But they weren't saying that because they were wondering how many babies the Joker was going to eat. And this is firmly entrenched. The dude bro element of comic book fandom claims this is one of the greatest, not only one of the greatest Joker stories of all time, not only one of the greatest Batman stories of all time, but one of the greatest works of literature of all time. I've known young men who, with a straight face, ranked this higher than Tolstoy. That this is a great work of literature. It's in fact an abomination. It's a travesty. So that's our comic for today. A comic that literally has not one bit of merit to it. Maybe you could say, if you stretch a point, that this Brian Boland cover is a bit of merit. That is a terrific cover. It's not the Joker who existed before now, but it's still a terrific cover, and there are some terrific visuals in here. But what difference does it make if there are terrific visuals? I mean, that's a terrific visual. But what difference does it make if there are terrific visuals in such a sordid cause? Michael K. Vaughan picked this book because I am sure that he thought, and he's right, that sooner or later we had to talk about it. Sooner or later we have to talk about The Killing Joke. Well, now I have done so. It is, I hate to use the hackneyed word, it's overused in the 21st century, but it's incredibly offensive on every level. The fact that DC Comics let it happen is, I'll never understand it, I'll never forgive it, and there's no way to get around it now. There's no way to write it out. The New 52 writers, when DC had a massive retcon, they tried their hardest to write it out, but even they couldn't get rid of it. It's too popular. DC can always count on an extra $75,000 a year if they do a special reprint of The Killing Joke. So there you go. That is your comics for today. Not hymn of praise, I'm afraid. Maybe we'll pick something better next time. In fact, if Michael K. Vaughan wants to do me a solid and is a little bit guilty about dragging me through the Killing Joke on an Epic Comic Book Wednesday, maybe he'll move over to DC Comics next time. The real DC Comics, not the Killing Joke or Arkham Asylum or whatever. But it's his show. I'm on for the ride no matter what. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.